Working for a paycheck now means sacrificing some potential in the future. Today I'm going to talk about the ratio of ownership and how you can start thinking about how to do work that's productive for yourself today so that you can be paid, as well as doing work that is going to pay you off in the future. Now, many of us have understood this concept of a freelancer versus an entrepreneur, and I think it was Seth Godin who first isolated these two ideas and started asking the question, are you a freelancer or are you an entrepreneur? And in my opinion, for most people, the right answer right now should be both. So let's break this down. Working for a paycheck means that you, whether it's a freelance paycheck or an employee paycheck, means that you're working to produce value for somebody else's business. They are trying to accrue value into an organization, into a product, into their business that builds value over the long run, meaning the company itself as an entity continues to increase in value over time. Whether you're a public company or a small company, most of your efforts are spent building the business, which means adding to this asset. And so your job as an employee or as a freelancer who's being contracted by that business is to help that business owner grow the value of that business as much as possible. It could be through design, it could be through customer service. Whatever you're doing, you're trying to increase the net value of the asset of the business, which is owned by the entrepreneur, the person who founded it. Now, it might be the case that you have some equity. It might be the case that your salary is based on public shares that you get vested in the company. But for the most part, your salary is cheaper for the business than the value that they're getting. So if someone pays you $100,000, that's because they believe they'll get $100,001 back in value or more. And there's an interesting metric called revenue per employee that I think is becoming more important in times like these, where you look to understand what's the ratio of value brought by employees to revenue of the company. And a big company like a Facebook has $1 million in literally millions of dollars in revenue per employee, meaning every person they hire makes the business $1 million+. So this is okay. It's a trade-off. It's fine. It's part of how this whole system works. But it's helpful to understand that whatever you're being paid, the business is making more. And that's just the natural sort of way of the structures that have been set up. And I think it's actually a decent deal for most people. You take on less risk, etc. Now, having equity, building an asset, building a business for yourself, that means you're hiring other people to add more value to the asset that you own or are acquiring. And it's different because you get to hold on to that value. So at Facebook, let's say you could work there. They pay you $250,000 a year, which is a ton of money for you, but the business is going to make $1 million a year. So they made $750,000 off of your work. The business gets to keep that value as it accrues each year. So long after you're gone, Facebook still has increased their share if things have gone well. Of the business, of the equity of the business has grown through hiring you. So if you're a freelancer, if you're an employee, the reason in part that you're doing this work is to take care of your short-term needs. You need an income, you need to feed yourself, you need to house yourself, you need clothing. All of these things are normal things and just realities of life that we have to deal with. But I think if we are to help ourselves in the future, we want to, if possible, if we're not in a time of crisis, both think long-term and also think short-term. And I think that too many freelancers, and here's a mistake, too many freelancers, they believe that by being they run their own business or you run your own schedule, that you're in that entrepreneur space. But that's not actually true for most freelancers. For most freelancers, if you were to not show up tomorrow, if you were not to, keep doing this work, you wouldn't have any asset necessarily to show other than some of your reputation. So what I would like to propose, or to suggest that you consider, is that are you making the risky assumption as a freelancer that your career is based on you being able to perform this function infinitely into the future without any asset that produces an income for you, without any asset that you're investing in now that produces cash flow or value to you later? You will be on the hook for forever performing a service for money. And I think a lot of people talk about this to say, you're working, you're just working for the cash or whatever. That's kind of what this breakdown looks like, is you are telling yourself, I will show up every day for the rest of my career to perform the service so that I get paid. But the problem is there's some risks there, right? What if the market changes? What if something happens? What if you're unable to perform that service? Well, then you are in a tight spot. So what I would suggest people consider is not, should I be an entrepreneur or should I be a freelancer? I think people should consider being both. And there is a ratio of ownership and assets to short-term interest for cash that you can strike. There's a balance you can strike that helps you generate your own equity, hiring other people or investing your own time into an asset that grows over the long run, which is going to pay you out in the future, separate from your time, as well as covering your needs in the short run. And that ratio could be 90% freelancer, 10% entrepreneur. It could be 80% freelancer, 10% entrepreneur. It could be 60% entrepreneur, 40% freelancer. And a mistake that many people make is putting yourself into only one camp or the other, because both have risks. The freelancer's risk is that they are not accruing any future value for themselves in an asset that can provide royalties, income, new deal flow, whatever it might be, and you're assuming I can show up and do this work at my full capacity forever. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're saying, I'm going to reinvest, I'm going to build this asset, I'm going to not take short-term pay, but that can get you into trouble, like not having any cash in your bank account because you've invested it all into the business. And I think for a lot of people, especially today, we have the opportunity to blend and blur these lines of a freelancer and entrepreneur more than ever. So I would like people to start thinking about this spectrum-like approach where you can ask yourself, how much of my time am I working for the immediate needs that I have? Again, if you're not in a time of crisis, how much of my time am I spending on near-term, immediate income problems that I have? And how much of my time am I investing in building a long-term asset? And of course, that could be investing your capital in the long-term assets. It could be acquiring real estate as long-term assets. It could be starting a podcast or a video series as a long-term asset. It could be teaching a course. It could be practicing a speech. It could be writing a book. It could be selling prints. I would encourage you to start considering how you pay yourself in the future, or how you build value that's going to deliver in the future, where your input now continues to pay you. So I have a friend who's an author, and every month he gets a check from Amazon for about $200 to $400 for a book he wrote. The book is not a major bestseller. It's not a New York Times book. But every month, purely through the rest of the work he's doing, meeting people, being online, that book that it took a few weeks for him to write and publish and self-publish, he invested time, but everything he does now can find its way back to someone finding and buying that book. And so he's seeing checks. It's not a ton of money. It's just $200 to $400, but those things compound. And so maybe he's spending 90% of his time on freelance work, but every month he's getting an extra $200, $400 as a bump. And that can even spike if something happens. Maybe he gets invited to speak somewhere and he sees a bigger spike. So these assets in the background, we can start with a really low bar. What does another $100 look like to you that's hands off on a recurring monthly basis? It's something we can achieve. There's no free lunch here. We have to work for those. We have to put our time in on the assets. Maybe it's 5 years of building assets before they start to give you that $500 a month extra bump in revenue. But at least you've diversified yourself away from being only an entrepreneur or only a freelancer. So I have an exercise for you to do to help think about where you stand. Create a spreadsheet with your 7-day calendar on it, Monday to Sunday. Create time slots, create days in the columns and time slots in the rows, and start to look at percentage-wise, how much time am I spending? Ask yourself, how much time am I spending on work that is an asset that will pay me in the future? And how much time am I spending on work that is freelance or as an employee that is getting me paid now, but is not investing anything that's mine in the future that will provide value for me. So I also think this is a great productivity hack. You can start to understand your schedule better. But my question to you is, what ratio makes sense to you? Do you want to be 90-10, 80-20, 60-40, 50-50, 1%, 99%? Wherever you're at, I think this will help you de-risk the future, add more value, help you invest in new areas, and diversify for the space of work that we're in today. So as always, let me know in the questions and comments what you think. Did this make sense to you? What came up in your mind as I discussed this? And I'll be back again with more videos on the new way of working, brand building, and community building in this online age that we're in. And I can't wait to be back here shortly. Thanks.